Hey guys, and welcome to another installment of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I'm Callan, one of your co-hosts, and I'm here with Mark and Neelan, my co-hosts.
We are also co-hosts.
Yes.
We all co-host it together.
If you're looking for co-hosts, you found the right place.
You found the most.
I'm confused. All right, today we're going to be talking about board games. We're going to be talking about games that we've played recently, and then we have a featured topic, which is how many games should you have in your collection? I think we have...
Spoiler alert, more than you have now.
Yeah.
We're going to try to get you to buy.
That's right.
As they say in the industry. But no, seriously, I think it'll be a fun discussion about when you should stop buying and culling and all that goes into that. So then why don't we start with you, Mark, talking about John Company. It's a boring sounding game, so I'm hoping...
It's a boring sounding game, I will give you that for sure. It's also a very dense game. So John Company is the latest game from Sierra Madre Games. It's designed by Cole Worley.
Is that how you pronounce that?
I think it is how you pronounce it.
Worley?
I think it's Worley.
I could be. My last name was Worley.
Could totally be wrong. No, he's American. He's American. The only other game of his that I have played is Infamous Traffic from a couple years ago, which was another very dense game. That game, so Infamous Traffic is about the end of the East Indian Trading Company and the subsequent opium trade and opium wars. John Company is about sort of the beginning and the pomp of the East Indian Trading Company. So both games sort of on a theme. But they're very different. They're both very dense, but both very different. So in John Company, you play as a competing family trying to install members of your family through the years into the East Indian Trading Company. So you're installing members into one of a couple different roles. There's the chairman who sort of oversees the company and allocates the resources. There are domestic roles like people who are choosing who gets promoted. There are international roles where you are, I think the term is the president of various parts of the company that is looking out for the company's interest in various cities in India. So those are the three main areas, but there are, I think, something like 10 roles overall. It's a semi-co-op game. What you're trying to do is you're trying to keep the shareholders happy by growing the company, making it more profitable. That can take the form of looking to India to expand, and you can get problems there with unrest, and you can decide whether or not which way you want to sort of quell the unrest. So this is also we've talked about Spirit Island last week, so this is another colonial sort of flavored game.
So wait, it's a semi-cooperative game where you all work for the same company?
Yes.
So you're literally co-workers.
Yes, you are co-workers. Different levels. I mean, I don't envision John Company as like an office where you're drinking coffee together, but because, you go from chairman to like a guy in Bombay running the industry for Bombay.
Oh, so these roles are changing throughout the game?
Yes, yes. So you've got these people in your family that are filling different jobs, and the jobs change round to round depending on who moves around. So you're trying to grow the company, you're trying to keep the shareholders happy, but you're also trying to use your influence in different roles to maybe take a little bit for yourself. It's like skim a little bit, for your own family, for yourself. And you're also, and this is the interesting part, is you're also trying to get fired. Because the only way to get points towards winning the game is actually getting fired and using your own family money to live a life of luxury afterwards.
Okay.
So you can, if you've amassed a lot of money, you can get fired and live in this big Scottish mansion for a lot of points. Or if you're barely have anything saved and you get fired, you could work for the press or something, some lesser thing like that. So that's generally the overview of the game, of what you're trying to do. How the game works is there's two sort of phases. There is the phase where you are putting members of your family up for different roles in the company. You're putting family members up trying to fill the spots. And then the second phase is where the actual roles all do their jobs. And another interesting thing about this game is it's a very heavy sort of Euro game, but the main mechanism for figuring out if something succeeds or fails is dice rolling. But it's as you might imagine, it's sort of mitigated. What you do is you roll dice, and you roll a number of dice based on how good you are in your roll. And you can always buy more dice. So if you're doing well, you might be rolling 4 or 5 dice. And all you need for a success is a 1 or a 2 on any of the dice. And there's a little chart that comes with the game to tell you what those percentages are generally, so you can sort of look at it. But if you only roll 5s and 6s, you get fired. Okay. You immediately get fired, and at that point, you can spend your cash to put your family member into, again, one of these lives of luxury or varying degrees of luxury. So that's sort of interesting, that dice rolling plays such a big role even though it's mitigated. It's getting a lot of positive reviews. It's a very interesting game. There's a lot, the theme is interesting, and I'm a sucker for historic themes. I'm actually also a sucker for Sierra Madre games in general, like PAX Renaissance is I don't know, I don't think it's very heavy, but the theme is very rich. Like every card in that game has a ton of interesting history about the Renaissance. Anyway, get back to this game. So it's getting a lot of positive reviews. It's very history rich. There's a lot of, the dice thing is very interesting. The whole you wanting to be fire thing is very interesting. However, my one play of it was just a little disappointing. The reason why is I was playing with two other people who played the game more than I did. And it's a very dense game. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of, benefits to repeated plays. So these guys we're all playing, and it's co-op, so semi-co-op. So we're all sort of like trying to get the company to do well together. But we're playing it, and I'm thinking to myself, like, these guys really know what they're doing. I am just sort of barely having a grasp on this. I'm just trying to learn it as they're talking about the different roles. As the game progressed, I got it more and more. But I never felt like I was.
You're actively competitive.
I thought to myself, I'm gonna get crushed, but that's fine because this is fun. This is interesting. This is really weird and cool.
So did you at least think that you would enjoy it a lot more in the second time around?
Well, here's the thing. Yes, as these thoughts are going in my head, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I'm getting it a little bit. It's interesting. I'm gonna enjoy it more the second time around. This is all really cool. However, the problem was that I ended up almost winning it. One dice roll at the end was all that it took for me to not win it. Now, to be fair, it was one dice roll out of 5 that another player made, so the chances were that he was going to win anyway. But just as an overarching thing, it sort of bummed me out that I was that close to winning. A game that I was clearly the worst player at. That sort of makes me feel like maybe the dice rolling part was the part that made it not so great, but it's also such an interesting mechanic that I'm sort of torn. I definitely want to play it again.
This might be reductive, but how long did the game?
It wasn't overly long. It was a long game, but not overly long, and they were teaching me, so there was some time for that. I would say probably about a little over 2 hours.
Okay, that's not that. That's, okay, I was imagining.
For a game of that scope, sometimes you might expect a much longer game, but this was relatively short.
I feel like I have a lot of complicated feelings about dice in games in general, but obviously like a longer game that boils down to dice rolls at the end, that's kind of where I would draw the line. But yeah, 2 hours, that's reasonable.
Complicated feelings about dice?
Well, I feel like I think I tend towards games that do not overly rely on dice as a luck-based mechanic.
I was trying to bait you. You didn't go for it. I wanted to hear more about the complicated feelings.
But I get what you're saying, and for a long, dense game to rely on dice feels even a little more difficult to swallow. It should be really mitigated. Maybe it was just one bad session. So that's John Company by Sierra Madre. Not a strong recommend, but I would definitely recommend it for people who are interested in trying it out.
Cool. What do we got next? Neelan, what have you been playing?
I want to talk about like something really quick because I don't have that much to say on this yet, but I've been playing Coffee Roaster, which is a solo game. And I feel like this will be the first solo game we talk about, which I know how excited you guys are about solo games. Yeah, I gotta be clear, like I know we joke about this a lot. I don't really play that many solo games. What I like about Coffee Roaster is it's quick.
Neelan promises that he has friends.
Yeah, I promise, guys. I'm not just sitting at home alone.
Is this like formally available in the U.S.? I know it was in Japan only for a while.
I believe it's Japanese only.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I brought it back for my many business.
Oh, did you really? Okay, cool. That's very cool.
I'm a very important business traveler.
Especially big in Japan.
Tokyo. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very short, like 10-minute game. It's got a pretty strong press your luck element. I feel like most of the solo games I played have been, and bringing this back to dice, over-reliant on just being extremely lucky. Whereas I kind of felt like I was, the decisions I was making in Coffee Roaster, despite being a short game, are interesting. I think we'll talk about this more later, so I don't want to go into too depth.
It's a bag builder, right?
Yeah, it's a bag building drawing game.
Cool.
But what I probably want to talk about more than that is Adrenaline, which is a game that we played for the first time a while ago, and I just recently picked up about a week ago. So played it again in the last week, and that game's real cool. It's trying to emulate a first-person shooter, for those that don't know. So if you're a video game fan, like thinking back to games like Unreal Tournament, Quake, that style of like overly bombastic, like just ridiculous run around, pick up crazy guns and shoot people. Like, that's the sort of theme it's going for. But surprisingly, it's actually more of a Euro game,
which is crazy.
Which is weird,
yeah,
right?
It's crazy that it goes for for a board game to go for a first-person shooter is crazy, and then to make that a Euro game is crazy, and for it to actually work. I don't know. Okay,
no, absolutely. I think it works great because like you look at the board and it's like, it's bright colors, it's little miniatures. You're just thinking that run around, roll some dice, like shoot some people, but no, you're like carefully constructing ammo. You're trying to get the resources you need, kind of, to like play these powers, which are the guns.
You make your own ammo in the game?
Well, no, you're collecting ammo from the board. But like, okay, so the way this basically works is if there's a series of connected rooms and everyone has a little mini, and you start in one room, and in that room you can pick up a gun, and the guns are little cards, and each gun has a completely different power, which is something like...
The guns are awesome.
The guns are all cool. There's something like, pick a target in an adjacent room, or pick all targets in the next room and deal this much damage, or mark a target, or pick a character that's behind a corner or on the other side of the map.
And they all have like these crazy like names.
Right.
I mean, that work thematically. Like there's one called like the furnace or something, and it like burns everybody. Like it hurts, burns. I said burns, but it damages everybody in a room. But you can like power it up, and then it like affects everybody in the next room. So
this is kind of the fun part. Is that almost I think all of the guns have like this power up, right? So you can always spend like an additional cube of ammo to do this bigger, better effect.
Right.
So it does become this like resource management game. It's like, okay, if I use my 2 blue cubes now, I can do this smaller effect, or I can save them for this bigger effect, or instead use them on this other gun I could pick up. So you're kind of just slowly moving through this little map, collecting ammo, finding the best way to use it, and it's got this cool system where you're picking a target to try to kill, but the more you kill a specific player, the less points that player gets worth. So you're trying to optimize who to shoot in terms of points.
And just to be clear, like all you're doing in the game is killing your friends.
Right.
There's no other target. Else. There's no like bad guys. It's just kill your friends.
There's no there's no sub objective. It's you pick up a gun and shoot one of your friends.
Yeah. And what's cool about it is like you're shooting your friends, but when you get killed, you become less attractive to your opponents because the amount of victory points they get is capped at a lower number. Like at first, when you first start the game, whoever deals the most damage to a person who dies gets 8 points. But once you die once, that number is capped at 6, and then it goes to 4. So you can't really pick on anybody because it doesn't behoove you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it invites like a free for all, like gang up on the person who's like made it out alive, but nobody makes it out alive. It's all like crazy firing away.
It's also got this other little fun little thing where as you're taking damage, you're actually getting better. Your abilities get slightly powerful as well, so you can move faster. Which is
where the adrenaline kicking in when you get hurt. Yeah, it's really interesting. It is a Euro, it's a Euro, but it's really the theme is great, and it's very evocative, and it's just like all these there's about 30 different guns, and they all have these crazy names, and they have these crazy power-ups, and even though you're just using cubes to like fire off and to reload the guns, the theme does really I feel like shines through.
Totally. Yeah. It's a great game. That's adrenaline, and if any of that sounds appealing, or if you played like a first-person shooter growing up, check it out. It's real cool.
I'm not ready to be done with this. If you attack someone and they die, is that player penalized, or how does that work?
So they just reset back to their starting health.
They spawn basically.
Yeah, they respawn in another spot on the map of kind of their choice. And like I said, if you are taking damage, you're gaining adrenaline abilities, so you reset. So you don't have those adrenaline abilities anymore, but you're just back on the map immediately. There's like no like time penalty or anything like that.
There's really no. I mean, I don't think there's really any penalty.
Not really.
The only penalty to dying is you're giving victory points to your opponents.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there is an expansion coming for this.
Yeah. There's an expansion that like
team. And how long does this run? How long does it take?
90 minutes.
Yeah,
that's so like that. So it doesn't overstay its
welcome. No, not at all. No.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I will go ahead and jump into the game I wanted to talk about this week, and that is actually one of my favorite games of all time, Innovation by Karl Chudyk. It's now in its 3rd edition. So this is a city-building tableau game where you are sort of going through the prehistoric age all the way to the technology age. Age 1 through age 10, sort of playing cards to your tableau, upgrading your civilization, discovering things like gunpowder and archery and philosophy and the internet, even as you get into the later ages, and then using those cards to do ridiculous combos to negatively impact the other civilizations that you're playing against. The game runs 2 to 4 players. I would mostly recommend you stick with the 2-player game, especially for the first game of Innovation that you play. But Innovation is one of my favorite games of all time because of how much tactics there are in the game versus a long-term strategy.
Right.
Each turn you're given 2 actions, and your choices are draw a card, play a card, or use the action of a card. But what happens is you can only have 5 cards up in front of you at any one time. So from turn to turn, your available actions are changing constantly.
Right.
And the game is more about exploiting the advantage that you have on your current board than it is about sort of planning for this long-term thing. You might have a combo that works really well right now, but it's going to run out of steam eventually. So you actually just need to keep hitting that combo.
And when you say capitalizing your advantage, you can get really strong combos or really strong chains going on.
To the extent that if you're at the other end of those combos, it just feels brutal.
Yeah, Carl Chudyk is known. He designed Glory to Rome, Impulse, and some other...
Red 7 probably being the most popular.
Oh, that's true, yeah. Multi-use card things, but everything in his game sort of feels overpowered. There's cards that we actually played most recently a team game of this, 2v2, and I had a combo that in Age 1 would steal Neelan's scorecards that were level 1, and then Mark had a card that would steal his level 2 and 3 cards from his score pile.
That felt great. That was my favorite part of
Look,
that
it was
game.
my first game. I'll say one thing. You did a great job of explaining it.
Yeah.
I mean, you told me it was one of your favorite games, so I had fairly high expectations, but you told me hey, this game, you can have these crazy combos. It can feel broken many times, but you just have to go with it. Going in knowing that was great. I really, really enjoyed it. But the reason I brought this up is to Neelan. We did just really wreck you, but I felt like if I was in your spot, I would sort of feel like any play of future cards might swing things. It feels like a game where things can if you have the right cards or you play the right situation, you can swing things right back.
Totally. And to be clear, that wasn't my first play of it. So I played it a couple of times, and I've seen that absolutely happen. It was I'm just getting wrecked for this game, and then, I can suddenly turn this around in an interesting way. Which brings me to a question for you, Kellen. How accurate would you say it is that game turns on the draw of a card? And I'm actually joking, because this is a point of contention between us a little bit about this game, but I don't actually feel that.
So the game has some luck to it. I think I'm always backed up by the hardcore guys online who play this online implementation have about a 90 to 92% win rate.
Okay.
So it definitely rewards skill, but it rewards knowing sort of the cards in the deck.
That's what I feel is the biggest thing.
So the way that the game works is you're sort of using these card effects, but they have icons on them. So they have castles. In Age 1 through 3, there's castles. And if another player has more castles than you, they also get to do that special action.
Right.
So every turn you're kind of looking around at other people's civilizations, and that represents how advanced they are. So you want to use your archery card, and if other players have enough of those icons, they too get to participate in archery.
Right.
So what makes that so interesting is that those icons change throughout the ages. So in Age 1 through 3, there's castles. In Age 4 through 6, there's factories. And in Age 7 through 10, there's these clocks that sort of represent technology. And so you need to know where things are and when they're going to come up to sort of plan, because you could be building out your tableau, not realizing that, in Age 4, that icon is worth much less.
The castles are worth less.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. And the reason I asked that mostly jokingly is that I do feel like it's easy to look at that game on the first couple of plays and be like, this feels completely luck driven. But like you say, once you are familiar with the cards and you know what's coming up and you know the sort of swings that can happen, and you're able to sort of mentally, not even just mentally prepare for them, but strategically prepare for them.
I call it controlled chaos.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a good segue, because I actually love that part of it, which is the whole game you're sort of trying to wrap your hands around the game and how to sort of steer it the way you want to go.
Right.
But in reality, the game is sort of controlling the flow. And everything that you do, you have this card that's stealing cards from Neelan, and you just keep hitting it over and over again every turn.
Exploit.
Because you can do it twice per turn, so you just keep doing it. But eventually it's going to run out of steam, and then the game turns on a dime, and suddenly you're no longer in that power position. This specific game was really funny because Neelan's civilization had sort of gotten philosophy and all this other like useless things, you know, like archery and
useful concepts like philosophy.
Mark and I had discovered
Guns.
like gunpowder,
we were just blasting,
and coal.
That's right.
And so we
were in the muck.
We dominated.
That's right.
But there is some downsides to those types of civilizations as well, and Christina and Neelan were just unable to sort of
get into the late game. I feel like they were set up for more advanced civilization.
And there were moments where it felt like it was coming, and then it just
you got hit with gunpowder.
That's right,
exactly.
Again and again. No, and innovation is cool. It also has another little element where either you can build out your tableau or you can try to skip through the ages. Because when you go to draw a card, you draw a card from your most advanced civilization. So if you're in age 4, you're drawing age 4 cards, but your opponents might be in age 6 or age 7, and so they're getting much better technology than you, but maybe their tableau is not as built out. Maybe their civilization doesn't have as much on the board. They just have sort of one nice card. And that counterplay where they could lose it all, you know, is sort of, it's amazing. You know, there's a card way late in the game, like nuclear fission, and it's like, you know, draw 3 cards. If one of them is red, you like blow up the entire game, and then like it sort of halfway starts over. And so as you get to age 10, that the final age, there's cards that say, you know, if you have the most green cards, you win the game. You know, and so if you're losing the game, a lot of times you sort of do this abandoned ship thing.
Just run
then you
straight
race,
straight
race
to
for the
nuclear
technology.
fission.
Yeah, exactly. Innovation has a couple expansions. It's quite cheap. There's a version called Innovation Deluxe that you can get right now that sort of has all the expansions. I would definitely not recommend expansions at this point. So if you're wanting to pick it up, the 3rd edition is less than $20. An amazing card game, and definitely in my top 5 without question. So that is Innovation. Unless you guys had any other final thoughts.
No, I do. I
love it. You want to play it more.
I definitely want to play it more. I would say, like most Carl Chudik games, it really rewards, like you said, knowing the cards and repeated plays, which is another draw for me. Like I feel like the more I play it, the more I'll get out of it.
Yeah, it's a game I always want to. I feel like I want to be playing more of, just to like get better at it.
Yeah.
It's great. All right, so now we're going to move on into our featured topic, and this is at my request. So these guys don't want to talk about this, so just let's start there.
Yeah,
they don't want to reveal the secret. So we're going to talk about how many games you should have in your collection, and sort of how that relates to the Cult of the New, Kickstarter acquisitions, and sort of this fear of missing out on the latest games as they come out, sort of how you run your collection. So why don't we start with our most normal person here, which would be Neelan.
I am
Mark.
often described as the most normal of the group.
That I misspoke there, actually, in this regard.
So I did the game of like actually counting on my collection in BGG, and I have about 70 games as of right now.
Which I feel like is probably still high
general. I think that's probably high on. I think so, at least.
Yeah.
I mean,
wow,
every time
70 games.
I know, yeah. You guys are like pathetic. Yeah. But it definitely still feels like a lot whenever I look at it, and it's definitely, to some extent, it's almost still bigger than I want it to be.
Do you look at it often?
I do. I just like stand there. I admire it. Yeah, exactly. I just admire it lovingly. Even at that, like I think, like you said, you guys would probably see that as a smaller collection. But even I look at that and I start to look at where I could cut stuff I don't especially need. My general sort of feeling, and I feel like this is fairly standard, would be to like look at kind of each genre or each major sort of like opportunity to play a game. Like, do I have a couple of good 2-player games? Do I have a couple of good 15-minute games? Do I have good long heavy games? Do I have party games? And like, you know, maybe having like 3 or 4 games in that space just for a bit of variety and like theme and mechanic and that sort of thing. I think that's mostly where I'm at, or at least mostly where I'm trying to get to. I'm definitely not there yet because I notice I have a lot more medium-heavy games than anything else. But
so you feel like your collection ideally would be a little bit smaller?
I think so. I think so. Because, like, for me at least, when I look at a game like that I love a lot, I mean, I'm just going to use Tzolk'in as an example, which is a game I love and I want to play more, and I never do. It's one of my favorite games because there's always a newer game competing for its place. I mean, I just feel like I would feel better about the games I owned if I was just playing them more and getting to know them more intimately and, you know, playing them.
So you end up just wearing out your solo games.
Exactly.
Yourself.
So instead I just play games on my
friends.
own.
More than a cry for your games.
Pretty much.
All right, Mark, tell us about your collection.
I feel like I'm the other end. I feel like you're the
That's
middle
true.
guy.
I'm the modern.
You got to work your way up to me.
All right. That's fair. So I have a collection, and I don't have it counted on BoardGameGeek like these nerds. But I probably have around 200. I definitely have probably over 100 games that I've gotten rid of. So my collection sort of stays at a fairly healthy rate. You wouldn't know it looking around this room. There's sort of stacks of games everywhere, as it were, and I kind of remember reading on BoardGameGeek or on Reddit some husband saying that he told his wife he would keep all of his games on the shelves, on his IKEA Kallax shelves, of course, and then he would move the shelf a little forward and then sort of put games behind the shelf. And so sometimes that's how I feel. I kind of look at my house or my space and think, is this enough? Is this too many? But then I also sort of look at general themes and mechanics and say, how many Dudes on a Map games do I have? And do I have too many? But I think I instigated this topic because I think that people's collections are too big broadly, and that they'd be better off playing more of their games more often.
Kellen is taking a shot at me right before handing it off to me.
I'm staring in your eyes, Mark.
That's right. Well, you're doing that all the time anyway. So.
Yeah.
So I have the biggest collection of this group. I've got 471 games according to BGG, and of course, reigning above them all is the number one game of all time. Greatest game of all time, Biblios. And I've had at various times in my collection a total of 1,000, I think 70 something games that I've had come in and go out, traded and all that stuff. But right now, 471. It's interesting to hear you guys talk about looking for games to hit certain mechanics or certain themes. For me, I trade games a lot, and part of determining whether or not to keep a game is just a value thing. If a game is, I think, at a really high value, if it's not, if the games that I love, I won't trade pretty much under any circumstance. But I will trade games that I like if I think I can get a good deal, a good trade. If I can trade up. But for me, when it comes to figuring out which games to keep or how big my collection could get, I'm only thinking about games that I feel like directly replace other games. So I don't really worry so much about, do I have enough or too many worker placement games? But sometimes I'll play a game and feel like, well, I'll never play this other game because of this
of this new one, right?
Which is, we mentioned this in the very first episode, for example, The Thing. Like, I don't own The Thing. I'm actually looking to get a copy of it, but I traded Dark Moon because I thought I will never play Dark Moon if I had the chance to play The Thing. I feel like it's just a replacement. It's like a Dark Moon killer. So if I find games that replace other games, or just games that I've grown tired of playing a bunch, or that I've just moved on, then I'll move them out. But for me, it's not so much making sure I hit a certain number.
So let's start with the first question that I have for this conversation, which is the difference between collecting, board games and sort of having a collection of board games. Because for me, I sort of look around, I have the 200-ish games here, and there are probably over half of them that will likely get played maybe one more time, sure, or never again. Mm-hmm. And so is there an inherent value in the collecting aspect of it, or where do you guys fit in on that spectrum?
I'm going to jump in just as the person talking with the smallest collection who's, like I said, thinking of reducing, because this one confuses me a lot too, because there are a couple of games in my collection that I have no interest in getting rid of, despite acknowledging I may never play them again.
Example?
For example, the one that comes most to mind is the World of Warcraft board game, which is not a really good game, but World of Warcraft is a video game that meant a lot to me, and it's a big time-consuming game.
You're revealing a lot about yourself.
That's fair. As a board game, there are so many other games that do everything it's doing a lot better. But because it's tied to a specific theme that means a lot to me, it's a game I feel like I need to own. More, I think, closer to what you were talking about is something like Through the Ages, which is a game that I think is incredible, but I never want to sit down and play like a 4-hour game of Through the Ages. But I still feel like I need to own it because it's like a top 5 game for me. So that's
interesting.
I sort of struggle with that question a lot of whether that's valid to just own a game just for the sake of owning it. But
I also struggle with this too. I don't feel like I'm collecting my games for the collection aspect of it or just to have them. Like, I rarely buy games new. I'm constantly trading for games. So and I don't really care as much as I think a lot of people do in the board game community about like the condition of the box and stuff like that. I care about it insofar as the value for a trade. But for me, all the games I have on my shelf, like are games that I intend to play, even if I probably won't play a sizable chunk of them. But at the same time, I think that the desire to collect is just an inherently human thing. I think people like collecting what they're interested in. You know, I think that's a thing that's just a natural thing. So, you know, you have to keep an eye on it if it is getting in the way of other aspects of your life. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for somebody to collect things just because they want to have a collection. You know, it can get out of hand, of course.
So, but I guess where the line is on get out of hand, right?
Right.
Because and I've never been in your apartment, so
right.
I guess that's a little weird to say, but if a random person were to come into your apartment,
right.
would they say that you have a board game problem just by being in the living room?
I mean, probably. That's fair. I mean, and a little backstory, like, I had a Kallax 5x5 shelf.
Yep.
And filled that up, and then I got a couple smaller 2-level sort of like bookshelves and filled those up. And then I was thinking to myself, okay, where is this a good place to limit?
Yeah.
Once I fill these shelves up, is this where I want to be? You know? So the answer was no. So I got another Kallax 5x5.
It turns out you just like bookshelves.
That's right. Well, yeah. I'm actually collecting bookshelves. But and then I said to myself, okay, this is where I'm going to end. Like, when I fill this shelf up, that's where I am. And I filled that shelf up, and I kept getting games. So I've filled up 2 Kallax 5x5s and a couple of shelves. I mean, I just don't feel bad about it, though. I mean, it's not depriving me of, like, you know, paying the rent or eating, and it's close. But it's close. Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm just subsisting on Happy Meals. But so it doesn't get in the way of my life, and it does add a lot of joy to my life. Not even just the collection, the social aspect. I mean, just some of the best times of my life, and I think most people's lives, are hanging out with friends and doing things you all enjoy. And I honestly, all those games on my shelf, I just feel like are opportunities to get together with friends and play a different sort of game. So there are definitely times in my life where I feel like I should trim things down, and I throw up an arbitrary number. Like, I remember when I hit 365, I'm like, hey, I'm going to have a game for every day of the year. That's it. And then I passed it. So
it just seems like you've set up sort of all these limits for yourself, and then sort of not met your own expectations.
Well, and
then just, you know, kept going.
So 500 was the limit. I hit 500, and then I dropped. And then that was a limit, so I've dropped down to now 470. I don't feel forced to cut back. I feel, you know, good with where things are.
Empowered to buy.
Right, exactly.
As we said
yes,
in the
just
episode.
fund the gaming industry is what I'm trying to do.
But what about other collections, right? And let's just talk. Let's get to the human center here, right?
Sure.
What about a guy who has too many watches? He's got over 100 of them, and it actually is impacting financially. Like, is the point of any collection is fine,
right?
Provided that it's not financially hurting them,
right?
So, but let's talk financially,
right?
Well, this is going to get cut probably, but you know, they say that over 50% of people don't have $1,000 to cover an emergency.
Sure, right.
So, what does financially impacting you mean in this context?
What is
like the games don't impact your bottom line at all. You're on track for retirement.
I mean, I would say that for as large as my collection is, and maybe it's a function of how much time I've put into it, so that's a sort of very important caveat. When it comes to people who have collections of comparable size to mine, I feel like I'm at definitely the low end of the spectrum in terms of money I put out per year, because I'm trading up. A lot of those games are just as a function of trades. Like, there's a site where you can go to and link it to your BGG collection, and they'll spit out how much your collection is worth. And the number is not accurate, but it gives you a sense of how much your collection is worth. And I've spent a fraction of that on my collection. Like, certainly I spent a fraction of the number that it spit out. And it's just, I think most people are just buying games new because it's the easiest way to do it, and it makes a lot of sense for most people. But as I've said in earlier episodes, I love the thrill of trading for games and getting good deals, you know, going to board game auctions where you can get games on like 10% of what they're worth. So if I was spending retail or like online or Amazon prices for the games I was buying, it would be a financial burden, but it's just not the way I acquire games, you know. There's definitely a trade-off in terms of the time I put into it, but again, that time investment for me is fun. Like, I like it. I like that it's not getting in the way of my business or time with friends or other social activities. So that mitigates to a great degree the financial part of it, you know?
Yeah. So the next thing that I want to talk about, right, so we've talked about the monetary cost or burden of a collection, but I think that that's not the only cost of a collection. So we've talked about previous episodes, the physical space cost of a collection, but then there's also the cost or the burden of researching new games to buy and the ownership and rules overhead that your collection encompasses, which is to say, Mark and Nealon come over and they're looking at my shelf and they say, more than anything else, we want to play Arcadia Quest right now by Cool Mini or Not. And I say that's
how we would say, by the way, too.
Yeah.
We would say, can we play Arcadia Quest by Cool Mini or Not?
And I would say, that's awesome. Just give me 25 minutes to read the rule book.
Sure.
Right? Whereas a small, dedicated collection of maybe, let's say, 20 games, you would know how to play each of them, and you would be playing them more often. You know, we talk about replayability as sort of this
thing to strive for.
The most important thing, because that's sort of what board games have been historically.
Yeah.
And then we're playing these games 5 times, maybe.
Right? You're right. Yeah.
And so, I have games like Concordia, which is just this classic Euro game that everyone is telling me is one of the best of all time.
Right.
I've played it once,
and
it's sitting on my shelf, and I know it's great, so I'm not going to get rid of it, but I might never play it again.
Sure.
So what does that mean?
This is actually fascinating, because I know this is something that you guys have struggled with. So I'm very interested to hear about this like mental burden of ownership, because it's just something I don't really struggle with, I think, too much. I don't feel like I have to keep the rule sets in my mind. I feel like right now I would only know a small fraction of my collection's rules. But I feel like whenever I go to a game night, we have I bring a couple games and I just refresh myself on the rules. Sometimes even on the way to the game night, I'll just
while you're driving.
Right. Yeah. I'll just have like a watch it played or something, or some rules explanation to refresh myself. So I'm interested to hear more about this, the mental burden for you guys.
The most recent example I can think of is I played Kemet recently, which is a game I like a lot, but I hadn't played it in probably a year or two. And it's not, it's a medium weight game. It's not crazy complicated, but like just despite it being a game I'd played a few times, 2 years ago, I had forgotten enough of the rules. I was basically just reading along. And, stuff's obviously coming back to you as you're reading the rules for it. And I do find that as a frustrating thing, where it's like, oh, hey guys, let's do this thing that we all enjoyed doing 2 years ago, but no one quite remembers the rules to it. I do think there is, I hesitate to say a responsibility, but I feel, to me, it seems like a responsibility to like know how to play any of the games in my collection. And that is actually certainly not true even of, the smaller size collection I have, but I want it to be true. Just because I would rather own and know fewer games that I enjoyed than feel like, oh, I've touched this game once or twice, or we all have games we probably never played. That's certainly true of both of you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it's not a crazy number for me. But even those games, those 2 or 3 games I've never played, like, it bugs me because I see them and I remember, oh, I paid money for this. This is taking up space on my shelf, and I've literally never played this once. It's a source of anxiety because I think back to the point, when I got and I was excited about it, and I just think like, oh man, it would have been really cool if I had played this. Like, remember how I felt when I first got this game and I was excited to play it? Wouldn't it have been cool if I'd actually played it?
I just find this like fascinating.
No, it nags on me.
Because I probably have, I feel like I should feel more guilty about saying this, but I have probably about 80 games I haven't played.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I don't feel any guilt about it.
Right.
Because I feel like, again, I feel like these are potential great nights. Like, all these games represent, like, fun times I'll have with my friends. And when the time comes, to play them, I'll learn the rules and we'll play them and we'll, break out the box. And everybody will open the box for the first time. I know a lot of people, when they buy a game, tear off the shrink and feel like they have to dive right in. I'm happy to have them sit and just, like, be, like, a shared opening for that first time. I always feel the responsibility to know the games when we're going to play them, but I don't feel any responsibility or any need to know the game's rules at all times. Like, I feel like we're going to have a game night. I'll bring 5 games. I'll make sure I know the rules for those 5 games, and that's it. And I'll probably forget the rules in a couple of weeks, but that's fine because I'll be playing other games, or I'll come back to those and I'll relearn the rules. So,
but even if it's not like sort of like an anxiety thing or a guilt thing in the way you're saying, do you ever? I mean, do you have the urge to play those games at some point? Do you ever feel like, oh, I mean, I have these.
Yeah.
50, 60, 80 games. Like, I want to play all of these at some point. Like, that has to be the goal.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, my collection, every game in my collection, barring a few that I have just for trades, which is weird, I know, but the vast majority of the games in my collection, I intend to play. And I've researched them, and I feel confident that they're good games. Sometimes you play them and they're not, but I feel confident that every game that I have is a good game. So I feel like I'm going to be playing all of them. And sometimes when I haven't played a game for a long time, I am then more inclined to trade it because for some reason I haven't got to it, and maybe there's an underlying reason. I can tell it's going to be too long, or I've learned that my group probably won't like it. I feel like every game there is going to be played, and I just have that confidence that it will be. Even if that's, and I'm sure that's false confidence in a lot of circumstances. I feel like of the 80 games I haven't played, I'm sure maybe a quarter of those will never be played. Sure.
So I think what I'm hearing, right, the net is that Neelan and I are advocating for, going home, hugging your wife, and playing the games that you already own. And Uncle Mark is over in the corner saying, buy.
Rent a warehouse. Step 1, rent a warehouse. Step 2, Calyx shelves. Lots of Calyx shelves. Step 3, acquire to any detriment.
This is the board game hype machine at work.
That's right. No, yeah, I mean, I just feel like you should do wherever you feel comfortable with. I think my collection is too big. Like I probably could use some culling, but I'm just where I'm at. I feel comfortable with it, but I can definitely understand people with smaller collections feeling like they would be more comfortable with them being smaller. Like, I don't have the same situation as you guys in terms of like how I feel about my collection, but I totally can understand where you're coming from, and I see the advantages of those ways of thinking. But it just doesn't. It's sort of also foreign to me.
I want to talk about your Shelf of Shame in particular, Kellen, because I think when it's like 2 or 3 games in my case, it's like, okay, I feel like I could, and counter to what you were saying, like you may never play those games. I feel realistically I could play those 3. I could get to a point where I've played every game in my collection. That's very achievable. How do you feel about yours? And you've posted this on the side recently, and we're looking at about 20.
I'm looking at them now, and I think there's actually a couple scattered throughout.
Yeah, do you have them segregated? Because you said
they're right here.
Oh wow, so you have a Shelf of Shame.
I do have a literal Shelf of Shame, and I keep it in front of my television so that I can always
constantly
be
reminded.
Right.
Yeah.
Because shame is a big part of my life. No, I think I have some games on there like Dune, which is a print and play of an old classic game. I spent a ton of money getting it custom printed. I'm super excited to play it, but it's a very niche, specific 6-player, 2-hour plus experience. We've been talking about doing like Dune Book Club and then doing it. So I'm very excited for that. It probably won't happen, until my birthday probably is when we'll end up doing it.
Right.
I feel good and confident that I'll get all of them played, but I do think that comes with sort of a moratorium on buying new games. We also have a whole section here that you see that was acquired through trading, and that I'm a little less certain about. Any game that I bought, it kind of reminds me of when I used to pirate video games. Like the games that I purchased, I was more likely to play and have some sort of ownership stake in
versus more special.
Versus games where I trade for it. Sometimes it doesn't feel real. I gave Mark all my games to trade, and then he wheeled in a cart of like 12 games, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, do I want to play this? Like I remember wanting it at one point,
right?
Versus the games that I have over here that I'm super stoked about. So I typically, if I haven't played a game in an X amount of time, I definitely look to get rid of it. So there are even games on this shelf that, well, actually I have a closet of games that I've like abandoned that will be gotten rid of, and then some of these will make their way to that closet.
They still live.
So I do sort of have them in different places, very, very intentionally.
Interesting.
I don't know what that says about me, except for the shame. All right, guys, that wraps up our discussion on board game collections. I think what we've learned is that I have the most appropriate collection size.
I have the best collection size.
Or Mark is a hoarder, and that Mark's Shelf of Shame is bigger than Neelan's entire collection.
Wow. I didn't know.
Oh my god, is that right?
I didn't realize that, yeah.
I have less games in my whole collection than games you haven't played.
And I think that number was conservative that I gave about
wow.
that, so that's... Yeah.
So we're going to start, we're going to finish up like we do every week with things that are making us happy. And I'll go ahead and jump in. I'm extremely excited about an upcoming Kickstarter from Colossal Games called Imperius. We're getting a preview copy of that, so that launches later in March. It's a sci-fi game, I think a tableau builder for 2 to 4 players. Just super excited to get it and to be involved. They're a new company that's doing a lot of cool things on Kickstarter.
I think I have the date right on this, but I think sometime in the next couple of weeks, Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea from Gamelin Games is coming from the Kickstarter, so I'm looking forward to trying that.
And I just got City of Kings, which is a diceless dungeon crawl.
Dice again?
Yeah, I'm all about dice today, but this is diceless.
Diceless.
Dungeon crawler sort of exploration game. Seems pretty interesting. I just got it a couple of days ago, so I'm looking forward to cracking that open.
Cool. And that about wraps us up. Thanks for listening to the Board Game Barrage podcast. You can find us at our website at boardgamebarrage.com. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and on BoardGameGeek. So if you want to talk, we're always around. And thanks again to Heart Society for letting us use the song What's on Your Mind, Kid as our intro and outro music.
You can find them at heartsocietymusic.com.
And thanks again for joining us for another episode.
See ya.
Bye.
Had come in and out total, so that's total games I've basically touched.
Wow. Over a lifetime? When did you first touch a game, Mark?
Oh, well, I was a young lad, and Monopoly was...
All right.
Mr. Moneybags was staring deeply into my eyes, and I just said, well, this is going to happen.
Why does that keep happening?
All right, I'm going to run it back.
Got it.
So, yes, I have the